Blog Talk Radio.
Live from Washington, D.C., it's Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio. QLPOR, as it's widely known, features a bevy of poets, spoken word artists, and live poetry readings with best-selling authors. Your host is Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
Good evening, and welcome to the program. Tonight, for your quintessential listening poetry pleasure, Sara Wagner is here. Sara's poetry has appeared in numerous journals and anthologies. She has been the recipient of multiple awards, including the 2020 Driftwood Press Manuscript Prize for her new collection, Hillbilly Madonna, which is out now and available on Driftwood Press as well as Amazon. She has also authored the following collections: Tumbling After, Redwood Chapbooks, 2022, and Hooped Through, 2017. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
All right. All right. Give me just a little bit more enthusiasm, Sara.
I'm sorry. I can't quite hear you that well. Sorry.
It's okay. We'll figure it out. All right. Are you ready for this poetic journey?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. All right, let's begin. Okay. What I'd like to know is, what is poetry?
What is poetry? Well, actually, I just started teaching my poetry unit to my students at Northern Kentucky University, and this is something that we really talk about a lot because I feel like they're kind of raised to believe, or at school they get this idea of poetry being this difficult thing or this puzzle or riddle. And I love how the poet Mary Ruefle, she says that poetry is an act of the mind. And I just love that, because for me, poetry is some kind of, it's intellectual, but it's also our desire and instinct to make meaning of things that are hard to put words to. So I think artists and musicians do that through, notes and images, and poets, we do that through words. We use words to kind of describe these big things that are acts of the mind or acts of the heart, or different things than story or the other genres.
All right, very nice. I like that. So they're making meaning of the world through poetry. Meaning. Tell me more about that process.
Well, for me, usually it starts with some kind of image or idea or confusion, even an irritation about something. And then, for me, the process of figuring out how to make that into something beautiful is what poetry is. Mm-hmm. All
right. What I'd like you to do now is to tell me why you believe poetry is important. Why is it important?
I think, I have a friend, one of my good friends, Ray Hoffman-Jagger, who just had a book out, but at her book release, she had these tote bags that said, poetry saves lives, which, some people, I think there have been a lot of discussions on the internet where people will say, oh, poetry doesn't matter, only poets read poetry. But I really do think that poetry is a way for us to, Adrienne Rich says, break silences, speak through silences. And a lot of times this does save people's lives. It helps us to understand each other, and it helps us to kind of speak things that are hard to put words to in a way that allows other people to see us.
All right. Please share a poem.
Sure. So I'll share the first poem from my manuscript, or my book now, Hillbilly Madonna, which is called Fit to be Tied. The moon is suddenly there in the dusty blue sky, just like the smooth, flat stones we throw into the pond, sitting in tall grass, cattails fat and brown as our legs, welted pink with mosquito bites. Sweat circle your head like a halo. You blow on a tight reed taut between your two thumbs, whistle so loud the chiggers rise up from the earth in a cloud. No one told us how to live as a girl would, to clean the dirt from our toenails, shave the holler from our limbs like scraping paint off an old truck. It's so hard to tell a star from a lightning bug when the evening sets. You have to really look at it to see it blinking through the blackness. I lose your face just like that, the way the bulb of an insect can go light dark as you trace it through the sky. Let's play that game where we lie so still this landscape forgets us. The crawdads and toads bloom into the night until our bodies become more than vessels carrying in the next dawn and the next, until we are this valley, budding and brilliant hillscapes, established and settling stones, until our Father comes shouting, headlights blazing down the dirt alley, lifts us into the truck bed, the indentations smoothing the outline of the land from our backs. One day we will be mothers, I say, as the sky races above us and we bump back and forth into the next stage of our lives. Summer, even now, gone.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. There's so much in that poem. There's so much in that poem, Sarah. So much to unpack. So what I'd like to know as we start to unpack your poetry, tell me about the collection itself, Hillbilly Madonna. What made you decide to write it?
Well, Hillbilly Madonna, it really comes from my experience as being the child of two Appalachian people. So my mother is from West Virginia, and she moved to Columbus, Ohio, the capital of Ohio, after her mother's murder. So there was it was a big, she's from Parkersburg, West Virginia, and actually the police officer who was in charge of the case of her mother, it was actually her mother, her grandmother were murdered by her grandfather, and my mother was there, and he wrote a book called Violence in the Valley about this, and my mom was like 14, and so this kind of has hung over me my whole life because my mom was very young when I was born, and she moved to Columbus, and she met this, hillbilly guy, my dad, who was from southern Ohio, Appalachia, and they weren't together for very long before they split their ways, but they both so carried in them this idea of what it means to be Appalachian and what it means to be a hillbilly. And so then I was kind of split in two ways. My mother, who, even though she's from Appalachia, she didn't identify with being Appalachian. She wanted to kind of leave all that behind her. My father, though, he built like a cabin out of junkyard scraps in the middle of the woods, like on land that's not even his. So I spent a lot of my time kind of between those two worlds. And so, I just was writing poems about my childhood and where I came from and the struggles that I had coming up, being kind of torn between these two worlds, where my mom kind of forcing me back on the line as wild and carefree as I would get. And I thought about all of the friends that I've had. I grew up during the opioid epidemic, during, the time still is happening, but everyone I know from where I come from has been touched by heroin and opioids in some way. So I just had a desire to, number one, explain this kind of split childhood, and number two, put a face to women, especially who come from this area, who struggle with drugs, particularly heroin and opioids, and to take back that story from people who would like to pigeonhole women like this and women like my family and me at times, and say that they're degenerates and unworthy of redemption. And so I guess that's where the Madonna, the element of the title, comes from. But I guess it's all those things. I want to capture the region, but I also, want to put a face to something that's a stereotype. Yeah.
Well, speaking of a potential stereotype, what does it mean to be Appalachian?
I mean, it's so many things. And I think, you get that idea of a hillbilly or whatever. And most of the time people imagine like white, uneducated, but that's not the reality of the region. There are people from all different, racial backgrounds. There are Appalachian poets who are just amazing, like Crystal Wilkinson and Frank X. Walker. And it means a lot of different things. And I think that's why it's so important to get as many voices as we can of people connected to the region to show that to the rest of the world, because definitely you have shows like Beverly Hillbillies and stuff, that present one picture of it. But yeah.
I'd like you to share with me the titles of 5 of your poems. Just pick 5 poems, just their titles. And read
5 poem titles.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a lot of poems. One of the poems is called Girlhood Landscape. And then we have What My Mother Saw, Narcan Metamorphosis, Heroin as Women's Work, and Masculine Epidemic. I think that's about 5, but you can see that I'm kind of playing with that idea of women and men and the heroin epidemic. Mm-hmm.
What I'd like to know is, what role should a title play in a poem?
I think the title, titles are hard for me. I read that first poem, Fit to be Tied, and that poem was originally called Hillbilly Madonnas, and the book was called Fit to be Tied, and which, is kind of a Appalachian word and Southern too, for being mad. But I think the poem, thinking about what a title for an individual poem does, I think it can do a lot of things. It can either be a clue for how to read the poem. If the poem is more lyric, for instance, it can kind of point you to meaning in some way. It can enhance the meaning. It can build on that meaning in some way. Titles are the hardest thing for me, though. So I always have to sit and think, okay, what's not in this poem that I need to say? That's usually what I'll make my title.
Well, let me ask this bit. Do you name your poems before, during, or after you write them?
Usually after.
Why?
So, I think, I don't, for me, the act of writing, I feel best about a poem when the epiphany or the discovery of what the poem's core is happens on the page. So I don't like to start knowing where I'm going. Like, I like to let the poem carry me. And if I have a title, sometimes I feel hedged into something, if that makes sense. Whereas sometimes I'll write like past, a lot of times I'll write past my ending where the poem should have ended. And then those kind of extra lines, I'll find a good title there so many times, just like a good bit of language that fits with the poem but isn't necessarily the ending. So.
The cover of your book is quite striking. Talk a little bit about the process for coming up with the cover.
Well, Driftwood is fantastic because they really have a good eye for art. I know you've talked to other Driftwood writers, but the James and Jared, who are the editors of Driftwood, like their aesthetic for their journal and for their books, clear idea of art and aesthetics. And so they presented me with a few different covers, and this was the one that I felt most drawn to. I really liked I liked how subtle it was, how you can kind of see the woman holding the child up on the top of the mountain, but
Yes.
you have to look a little close for it. It looks dusty and I don't know, it just gave me the feeling of my book. So I really appreciated that. But they did give me a few other different cover ideas, and I liked those too, but I appreciate it because I said, I think that's the one I'm drawn to most, and they were really generous about being like, okay, we'll do that one then.
All right. How is the book structured? Are the chapters, sections?
Well, there are 3 sections, and I didn't title the sections, but I gave them epigraphs of Americana songs, 3 different lines from Americana singers, just because that also felt like, that's the music I love, and I felt like it really went with the feeling of the book to situate that with some music too. But then the section, they also kind of explain. So the first one is from Gillian Welch, and it says, "We cannot have all things to please us, no matter how we try." So that's kind of the before period of the book. So it's kind of chronological, but then in the end, I break that up a little bit, because what I really wanted to do was structure this into 3 sections, but have the final section be a sort of blending of the childhood things back in with the more adult things, and then a birth. I wanted it to end in this kind of birth suite of poems, which shows, there is hope that a new generation can be born and it can be different, but then also we can't ever leave. Things like generational trauma and addiction don't just leave you. There's no easy here and there. It's all kind of cyclical, and together it exists together in one space or person. So I tried to capture that in these 3 sections.
Sara, what did you learn about yourself writing this book? Who are you as a consequence?
I learned a lot, I think, because this book, we learn so much when we write poems, I think. It's just natural. But this book in particular, it made me face a lot of hard things about my family and about my past and about who I was and who I might be now, and about, people that I've lost to drugs and to other things. It just made me learn a lot about, in particular, my mother and how much she fought to keep me out of the fire, I guess. And and the hardest thing about this book really is that my father actually died of COVID this year.
Oh,
and
sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, looking at this book, I had a very fraught, kind of difficult relationship with my father. He was very, he didn't really want me to go to college. He didn't appreciate me being like my mother, basically.
Yes.
So I wrote this book, before he got sick, really, and it got accepted before he got sick. So I've had to, it's been published now, and I'm kind of going around and talking about it and looking back through everything. I think I've learned a lot about him, about why he made his choices, because as I research, people who left Appalachia for another life, a better life, but then didn't find it, which is what happened to him. He was in poverty, his whole life. He did not break any cycles of anything. And so just understanding that line and learning forgiveness for all of that, which I don't think is really present in the book, with the figure of the father, who is at times my father. And of course, poetry is not memoir. So, there are other aspects just of masculinity that I put into the character of the father, but I think it has helped me to understand a lot about people like him and the choices that he made, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes, I can understand. For those listeners who do not know where Appalachia is located, where is it located?
That is a great question because I think a lot of people think of Appalachia as, even my own family. I am just now understanding what Appalachia is, but it runs through West Virginia. All of West Virginia is entirely Appalachian, but then there are parts of it, through Ohio, like the southeastern part of Ohio, even up northern in Ohio. There are parts down into Tennessee. It's kind of a range that goes along that eastern side, and really is concentrated there in West Virginia.
Because I lived in Cincinnati for 6 years. I graduated from the University of Cincinnati.
Oh, you did?
Northern Kentucky. Yes, many times.
Yeah.
Yes, very nice. I wanted to talk to you about that. Okay.
Yeah.
If you had to give advice to your readers before they open the book, what would you tell them?
I would just say, come to it with an open heart and an open mind, and allow yourself to get an understanding that might be different than what you think, especially about women who make choices that might not be the same choices that we expect women or mothers to make, because I feel like we're so hard on mothers, and just be open to that human element.
All right. Please share it with me.
Sure. So since we're talking about heroine so much here, I think I'll read Narcan Metamorphosis. The first time they bring my sister back, her blood has clotted into a slug. It creeps through her veins, observes with its baleful eye the canyons of her dark-cornered scissor ribs, how they pierce through her stomach like a baby's foot, how the clot finds its way to intestines where it breaks apart, waterfalls the GI tract, until the doctors have to take that, large and small intestines, replaced with a winding road we would walk to our fathers, up and down the hill, around the bend. And again they take her face, which is the stamen of a daisy, anther and filament neck, her hair falling out in clumps, petals. They take her fingers, which shiver notes on the clean white sheets, her toes, blackened and swollen, her teeth. The next time they bring her back, half her heart has turned stone, as if she has seen her own image in a mirror, as if she's caved off parts. The doctors go in with a chisel plow, break up the hard pan soil between organ and bedrock, remove and replace it with a bovine valve, cow heart, sister. And because the cattle are so like us, grieve when separated, isolated, notice threats and stigma, branded with stigmata or a name across the side. She is the same girl, and she returns to the needle again. Thank you.
What is the purpose of that poem? What are you attempting to convey?
I think for me, it is this understanding of, a lot of times people want to vilify people who, get brought back by something like Narcan and go through all of this rehabilitation, medical intervention, and we want to say, like, that what is that? It doesn't make sense. Why do they keep doing this? What's wrong with them? And I think this poem, I wanted to show that struggle as something more mythic, to show it as not personal, failing or weakness. I used some images, for instance, from Paradise Lost to show the struggle of for the spirit, really, of trying to survive and it being bigger than a human can handle, you know? So I just wanted to take that struggle and make it human and epic and something that people can feel instead of just judge.
Yes. You write exceptionally well.
Thank you.
What I'd like to know is, what was an early experience where you learned that poetic language had power?
I think I always wrote in poetry, which is so weird to say, but I have always been drawn to, rhythmic speaking, and I was drawn to rhyme. So my mom likes to talk about when I would get journals, when I was little, I would write just like in rhyming poems, and something about that seemed natural for me. I just felt drawn to it. But I remember, in particular reading poets like one of the first ones I read was, who I really felt that connection to was the poet H.D. and her use of myth and image and just how much can live in an image without explaining it. Just the images in general, I was really drawn to kind of as a high school student, that idea that you can just like in art, let an image fester and just presenting that in language has a lot of power. I think that idea was really moving to me. And then I have always been drawn to music too. So for instance, Tori Amos was a big influence for me. And I remember being, maybe 12 or 13 years old, and I heard her music for the first time. And she is so lyric and weird, and her songs don't even make sense sometimes, And I remember just feeling like, oh, you can do that? Like you can use language that way? That is amazing. So I love language, and I love to play with it. And yeah.
Did she sing "What If God Is One of Us"?
Yeah, no, that was Joan Osborne. She sang "God" though. She has a song called "Just God."
All right.
But yeah, she's like that.
I tried to be up to date. You spoke of one person, and again, all great writers have great writing influences. Who are some other individuals that you view as being great in your eyes, and why?
Yeah. Well, I mean, really another poet, and I was really lucky to be able to, work with her for a week at the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. But Nicole Brown, I don't know if you know that poet. She is phenomenal, and she has two books. One called, she has more than that, but two books that I read that really influenced me were her book Sister, and then she has another book called Fanny Says, which is about her grandmother, Fanny, who is just kind of this, smoking, Cloroxing, big-haired figure who's just amazing. And the way that Nicole Brown uses language, it's like she captures a place, she captures people, but it's still so elevated and so lyric, and I love it. I love Tracy K. Smith for the same kind of reasons. Her Wade in the Water and Life on Mars both are just so incredibly. I love the elevated lyric, and then also the kind of ordinary, how they blend together into one. Also, Maggie Smith has been really inspirational for me. Her whole journey as a mother, I connect so much to her work and her story, and she's, she's someone that I aspire to produce work the way that she does. But they're just so, and like the way back when I was a younger child, the Sylvia Plath, of course, and those older poets like Edna St. Vincent Millay, and
yes, I love her.
Yes, yeah. So I just love. I love to say that there aren't really. I mean, there are bad poets, but not really. You know, like most of the poets' books of poetry I read, like poets are, you know, they know what they're doing, and I can always find something that's just beautiful and interesting in someone who feels drawn to that genre of poetry.
You know,
they're just
really come alive when you talk about these poets and what poetry can do. You really come alive. You really, really do. And I'm wondering, you've been writing for a while. Is a poem letting your guard down or building a wall?
I think, I mean, it can be both, to be honest, because I think I am drawn to poetry for the way that it protects, you know. I don't have to write a memoir where I just lay everything out for everybody. I can hide myself, but also I can speak a truth, you know. So I'm letting the guard down a little bit, but also I can construct this, you know. Marianne Moore, I put on Twitter that I dressed up in for Halloween as an imaginary garden with a real toad in it for my class, which is really nerdy.
All right.
But that's what she says the poem is, you know. It's like an imaginary garden with a real toad. So, you know, the toad is like letting your guard down, and then the imaginary garden is kind of that wall that we build that's like this beautiful thing. But if you look close enough, you'll find that little toad in there. That's the vulnerability, I guess.
Yes, vulnerability. Does it hurt you to write poetry? If not, why not?
It does hurt to write poems.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but it doesn't too. I mean, it's both. You can't not do it, but it hurts to do it, you know.
Yes.
Because I think for me, it is. I have to let myself go to those places that don't feel so great, to speak into those and kind of get past and get through whatever it is in there that is uncomfortable for me, to kind of air it out. And that can be really painful. But after it's done, it feels a lot better. So
yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. It's extremely cathartic, and being able to vent is so important. To bottle that stuff up and walk around with it every day, that's a lot. That's a lot. You've got to find some mechanism, some way of just expressing yourself. I'd like you to tell me about a poem you are proud of writing, but afraid to share for fear of possible misinterpretation.
So there's a poem here that, you know, I think there are a lot of poems about my father actually in here that I'm very afraid. You know, I haven't really read much yet at readings and things because I don't want people to see him as a monster, even though he was monstrous at times. But I think for the sake of this book, you know, I did not put in very much like goodness of my father, because, you know, and I keep saying poetry is not memoir, but because I wanted him to, the father character in this book, to represent masculinity and oppressive masculinity in some ways.
Yes.
So I think the worst ones of him, maybe even on cutting him off, is one in this book that I get very nervous about reading because I don't want people to see my father as just a monster because of what's happened to him now. You know, if he were still alive, he could answer to whatever I say.
Yes.
But now I've kind of painted a version that people who don't understand poetry, or people who see poetry as just purely confession, might think, oh, that's all he was, you know? So
yes, I do understand that. So how do you balance that? How are you able to submit your manuscript knowing that there are potentially words in it that describe someone in a way that maybe you didn't always see him that way?
Yeah. Well, for me, I thought he will never read it. That's what and I thought I didn't say any lies about him in this. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, there aren't lies about him, and I didn't tell his biggest secrets, which I did one podcast shortly after he passed, and I did say something that I had to then write to the it was through Bull City Press and say, please, can you take that part out, you know? So, and in my mind, and I kind of put this in there's an interview in the back of the book, which really helps, because Driftwood, they publish, along with the books, an interview with the writer where you get to kind of talk at length about different things. And I talked about how my mom said, oh, you can't write about me till after I'm dead, because my mom reads everything I do. And so the parts of her story that are in here, which there are parts of her in here, she has given me permission for. So then kind of all the bad things I had to kind of put on him, you know, because I thought to myself, he's not going to read this. I'm not going to put anything on her. So, you know, but then you didn't expect him to, I didn't expect him to pass. And so, you know, I've written a lot of stuff about, I'm very critical of masculinity and the patriarchy, especially how it functions to, you know, oppress women in these kind of, especially with the idea of parenthood and drug abuse. You know, men like Kurt Cobain get hero status, whereas like Courtney Love is awful, you know? So I'm very critical of that. So sometimes he becomes, the word father becomes symbolic for me, and I'm not necessarily thinking about him, but then after his death, I had to be like, well, you know, his ashes are on my mantle, like he's gone.
Oh, really?
And
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sure that's a huge thing.
Yeah. It's been complicated trying to come to terms with who he was, and who he was to me, and who he was really, you know, which is is different. That's, I guess, all of our parents. That's what we have to come to terms with.
Oh yes, that's true. I know that. When you think about, it sounds like in your book, there's a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to take just a short little break here. But I'd like you to think about this question and you answer it once we return. Do you think someone can be called a poet if they don't feel strong emotions? All right?
Yeah.
All right. We'll be right back. We are back. I am Michael Anthony Ingram. I am here with the thoughtful, sincere, and authentic Sara Moore Wagner.
Thank you.
What do you think about that question about the emotions?
That is a hard one, Michael. I think. Yeah. I mean, I think that poetry is of the emotion, and that you have to, if you don't feel something when you're writing the poem, then you can tell on the page. If I'm just writing some kind of exercise because I feel like I need to write, sometimes those can be interesting. It's more intellectual and thought-based, and sometimes those can be good. But I think the real magic comes when you can feel that the poet felt while they're writing a poem, and I can remember what I felt when I read the poem that I wrote. That's where the beauty is, I think.
Please share a poem.
Sure. I'll share Passing It On. I want to make a child from the one I have lost, to make the base of her noble by some means. Alchemy, the tin girl my father built from junkyard scraps, golden now. I'll pull her out of my pocket, hunched in the woods over a patch of clover, show her to my daughter, say, aren't I so lucky to keep carrying this with me? Look what I've done for myself, how far I have come. Bury her deep in the creeping water primrose roots that strangle the section of the pond where we search for snails, one after the other, turn them upside down to find a body. It's funny what's lost, how we pull up fistfuls of empty spiral shells, how I put the girl I have made deep into the webbing of organic matter, say live, or at least absorb the heat from the August sky, the tilt of the moon, Neptune to blue your eyes. It never has worked that way. Instead, the metal of the girl I let die leaches into the water supply. We drink it and swell with the grief of being born like this, swell our fingers, our kidneys and toes, grow so large the world won't miss us. How we burst open, vermilion the bank of this quiet space we've tried to sacred. How we are just one color now, red, better for it. Thank you.
Some poets claim that a poem is like a living creature. Once it's out there, there's not much you can do to correct or improve it, while others edit meticulously, not leaving much from the original draft form. What is your take on the editing process?
I have friends who do, all of those different things. So, there are, here in the Cincinnati area where I live, I have 3 kind of best poetry friends who might be listening to this right now. Caroline Plaskett, Kristen Noel Kaufman, and Ray Hoffman-Jagger, who I mentioned earlier. And we all have different approaches to this. And Kristen Noel Kaufman, she is very meticulous with her kind of editing and working through each part. But I write in a torrent. And a lot of times I will, I write very fast. I kind of write as I'm feeling something to kind of capture whatever magic is in that single feeling. And sometimes I will go in and revise heavily for a long time. Recently, I sent out a packet of poems, and I revised this one poem. It was like 12 different days that I kept trying to send this packet out, but this poem just was not right, so I could not let it go. But my method for revision really is I will write like that to capture something, to get it all out at once very fast, and then I put it aside for a whole month, and I don't look at it again because I want to forget that feeling a little bit so that I can turn on that more critical eye and not be in the feeling and take out what isn't capturing that or what isn't working. So I think I have two sides to me that I don't edit in the moment like my friend Kristen, but I definitely revise heavily.
All right. You know, so much is happening in the world today. The good, the bad, the ugly, and the indifferent. What I want to know is, what should be the role of a poet in modern-day society?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the poets that we've had as poet laureate, like Joy Harjo and now Ada Limon, they're doing really amazing things to kind of bring poetry and voices of people we might not normally hear to the masses, to give them something to connect to, because if we lose poetry, if we lose that beautiful art, what are we left with to connect one spirit to another? And we'll start to build all of those walls that kind of separate us from each other, that make the world, that's why the world is what it is because we can't, speak heart to heart and understand each other in the way that poetry allows us to do. And poetry has been around, since human beings could first put words to anything, even orally, before they could write. So it is a way of passing on a lot of the truths of what it means to be human and bridging gaps in time and space and everything. And so the role of the poet is to try to bring that to people, whether it's children in schools or through the radio like you're doing, which is just beautiful. Bring that to as many people as you can.
Yeah, thank you. I asked you at the very beginning about enthusiasm, but you're very enthusiastic.
Yeah.
You're very enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And then again, you don't know me, so you had to warm up to me. So that's just like reading a book of poetry. You've got to warm up to it initially. There may be things and situations in it that you're not ready for at that beginning time. But if you take your time with it, I think Hillbilly Madonna may be this way. Maybe some things that you've never thought about.
For sure. Yeah, it's something that I hope people can warm up into and see, the plan for this, which, as I said, is to change what people think and make people see this region and people who come from this region differently, especially women.
You share at readings, poetry readings, am I correct? And poetry, Okay, great. What is the relationship, Sara, between your speaking voice and your reading voice? Is there a difference?
Well, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, one of my mentors, Pauletta Hansel, she's really helped me to improve as a reader. I always say that people don't become poets because they like to perform and be in front of people. We would be actors or singers or something if we like to do that. So I know there are poets who are spoken word poets and who do come to poetry from that more oral and performance-based side, but that's something that I've had to kind of learn to do.
Yes.
And I try just to be myself. I try to be genuine and vulnerable when I read. But Pauletta, circling back to her, I was talking, she has this like lovely, calming reading voice. And I kind of respond to the crowd. So, I feel like I feel very comfortable with you because you're just so, warm and joyful, and it makes me want to match that. But I've been in front of crowds where they just stare at you and they don't say anything. They don't laugh at your jokes. And then I get very nervous. Yes, and she told me, don't think of it as performing. Think of it as hosting. Like you like to host and you like to be friends with people and talk to people and connect with people. Think of a reading that way as, you want everybody to be comfortable. You want everybody to hear. You want them to take something away. And that speaks to me. I like that idea of a reading being like hosting someone into your private space and making sure they're comfortable and they can hear you. And yeah.
Yes. You know, that's my goal on this show, to make people feel comfortable, because you're sharing, in many instances, very personal, you know what I'm saying, very personal information.
Yeah.
And that's not easy. It makes you very vulnerable. But I want people to feel that this is a safe place. I really do.
Yeah, you do that well. Mm-hmm.
Well, let me ask you, do you think you were meant to be a poet?
I do.
Tell me more. Tell me about it.
Yeah, when I was in high school, my senior superlative was most likely to be an author. Like, I feel like the only thing I've ever been good at is poetry. And really, if I didn't do that...
I don't believe that, Sarah. I do not believe that. I'm not going to let you say that on the air in front of these millions of people. I am not going to let that be the final takeaway from this program.
I mean, Michael, I just learned to ride a bike over COVID.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like there was one, there's that two roads diverging. I had one road that was like, okay, this is your thing. And then it became my thing, like yes. My brother, I have one brother who's really good at visual art, and I tried that, and it's like the kind of thing where people are like, did a child make that, And then my other brother is very good at science, and, poetry, I just love it. It's something that I choose to read above everything else. It's something that I'm drawn to in writing. It's all there is for me, really.
Well, what surprises you most about being a poet?
I think, this whole journey to like actually having books has been a lot for me. Just because I never thought, I always was trying to, publish and be this thing. And then all of a sudden, actually, I had my first books, both of them came out this year. And I won the Cider Press Review Editor's Prize for my first book, Swan Wife. But I found out about that and this in the same week, which was crazy. Yeah. And so just the idea of, and it's been a lot for me to come to terms with, because I've always been just kind of hungry, like I'm going to do this, I can do this. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we want your work, and it can happen. And now I'm like, oh, well, how do I like recalibrate myself as an artist now that I'm not just like fighting all the time, and trying to prove myself, because I feel like that drove me so much to try to say, I can do this. I'm capable of this. So now just, figuring out, okay, what's my role now for the next part of my life as a poet? And I think it is focused on that idea of education. I've been pouring myself into teaching, and I'm about to go teach some workshops at Bowling Green this weekend, just thinking about how to transition into teaching and like talking about craft in a different way than just hustling all the time.
Well, we've reached my favorite part of the program. I call it a scaled-down version of a mini concert. This is where you have an opportunity to read 3 or 4 poems back to back, no interruptions from me. Just read your truth. You're on stage.
Okay. I'll read 3 poems from the end here. Okay. This one's called How to Cope. A long time ago, I built a stick house by the railroad tracks in the backyard of my childhood, covered myself with leaves, and the earth was as small as my bony wrist. I was escaping, like our father always has, to the woods. Later, the sheeted cold, the sky metallic as a gun barrel, and not one thing was natural or small, not one thing. This is the secret, buried under brush, Osage oranges piled like landmines. No one came to find me. The mind of a parent can keep you in your bed, tucked, even when you're lying under foliage, heavy as your own body. I don't want you to be afraid to walk shoeless into the wide fields, but look at how the ground splits beneath us, cantaloupe rind dropped, these seeds. Imagine safety while the girl sleeps alone, the buzzing of mosquitoes, the rattle of passing. You'll know what the world looks like, how sometimes nothing is watching you slip away. This one's called Idle and Lawless. All beautiful like the side of the hill, dirt and rocks and wildflowers, the mosquitoes low over the rain-filled tire tracks. Bees hover, test the sugar in our sweat. With lit cigarettes pressed between our lips, we flick the ash onto the wet side of the earth. We are playing boys, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. The creek is high. We wade barefoot, jeans rolled up to our inner thigh. We are looking for an image to latch onto, to start us rolling through the rocks. We want to run from something, towards something, to solve the mystery, to get out. I don't want to be Tom, I say, because he always was clowning, and let's be real. I am the smart one. We'll build a raft from all these sticks. We'll leave you with that needle in your arm like a box of stolen gold. We'll leave you because I can. And making you this story just as a blood oath. I will borrow your lines and flee west. I'm always the one to run from it. I'm always the one to run. The last one I'll read you is more of a landscape poem. It's called Elements of Decay. On the road up the side of our mountain, through the chinks in the trees, there's evidence we cared for something. A decorative awning over a sagging porch, black streaked windows busted out and boarded. Beyond, there is a hand-carved mantel. Through the layers of cardboard patching the hole the water has worn under the sink, there's a foundation laid by hands ready to call the land home, to cut away the wilderness and sleep. Poison ivy boiling the surface of the skin like the rusty water in the pot on the wood stove. Boiling water and skin means work, to be ready to work for a bed with sheets hung out in the sun, until the hunger comes and we are all on our knees in the church, opening our mouths for bread. And like those crows who swoop down to steal even the light, we'd eat the fire blooming on the candles, the wick, the wax. We'd eat the fingers of the Father, eat the sandstone cliffs, the whisper of a bobcat in the woods. We are hungry, want to adapt to a landscape, claiming back what we took from it. Our bodies sinking into the soil, pulled down like the siding we keep pushing up with anything we can find that sticks. And like we do, the trees put their roots into the creek to cool off, and that, too, looks like shelter. When we walk, the frogs and snakes disappear into it. Thank you.
Do you live your life like it's a poem?
I don't know. I do have 3 little kids, so sometimes it's really hard.
Do you?
Yeah.
I know you're telling me.
It's really hard for me to do that.
I understand.
Yeah. They won't let me, especially my 13-year-old.
They won't let you. All right. Even if you want to, they won't let you. Does knowing that your poems are published and out there in the world validate you being a poet, or are you content knowing they're out of your system?
Yeah, I mean, I do think I want them to be, out in the world. I feel like we all write in some way because we don't want to die, and maybe that's just me. It's this desire. to have something of me that lasts, and to say something that won't leave the earth, because I know I will. And so having them out there in some small way kind of is a comfort to me that, okay, that maybe this will touch someone and it'll go on to the next thing, and a little piece of me can live forever in a way. I hope that's the goal.
Well, hey, you're doing it. You're giving voice to the voiceless, and that's extremely important. We've reached the end of our poetic journey. But before we go, I'd like you to at least share one more, just one more, as an encore, just something.
I would love to. This is the third to last poem in the collection. It's called "Even If These Promises Are True." The oak trees bud leaves small as a mouse's ear. All the fathers abandon their children, wives folded into torn sheets, to go hunt morels, tucked close to the bark, oak, ash, elm, hickory, sweet naked morning, shoeless and stripped as the apple orchard. And then why does the morel love a tree? Tied either to roots or dirt, they grow and regrow, and our Father never knows enough to tell us why. Just that a fungus, bulbous and blonde as a daughter, comes back and back again each year, triggered by the loss of winter, a snap of warmer days. The first promise, you've overcome it. You will overcome it. Wake to our Father hovering over you with a dish of them, meaty and tender, sautéed simply in fresh Amish butter or battered and fried, stuffed full of cream cheese, and you will eat and eat until you feel better, until you forgive him for it, for abandoning you to hunt, for developing his eye to always turn to the earth, to the dark soil, to the roots, then body of the sycamore, where if nothing is budding, at least he can tap it, drink that water sap. Keep on. Thank you.
Where can listeners find your work?
You can find me at www.saramorewagner.com, and my book Hillbilly Madonna is available from Driftwood and wherever books are sold, and Swan Wife is available from Cider Press Review.
All right. So again, they can stay in touch through your website.
Yes.
All right.
The website has a
What's
contact if they want to reach out. Actually, I've written a book about Annie Oakley. Weirdly, I've moved away from talking about myself. Yeah.
You have to come back for that one. I'd love it.
Yeah. When that one gets published, I'm going to reach out to you because.
I'd love it. You know,
I needed a break.
You must write all the time.
Yes, I do.
Got 3 kids. You've written a book about it. Oh, boy. I love it. All right. As we were talking this whole hour, I kept envisioning a movie in your future of Hillbilly Madonna. I don't know why, just something came over me, and I said, you know what? I'm going to see this somewhere else.
Yeah, that would be.
I'm serious. I mean,
cool.
I don't know why that came over me like that, but it really, really did.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully it'll be better than Hillbilly Elegy. We'll just say that.
Yes. Well, I
replace that one.
Thank you. I want to thank you so much. You're incredibly talented. Your work is sublime. You tackle tough issues in a way that make it palatable to the system. Sometimes palatable to the system, sometimes not. A nice balance, I think. So, wow. I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really wonderful.
I appreciate it. All right. We started off slow, but we
got it.
We killed it at the end. We did. All right. To our listening audience, I want to thank you for tuning in as you always do And as I share with you every week, let poetry ring somewhere throughout the land. Good night, everybody. Good night, Sara.
Good night. Thank you so much again.
Yes.
Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio, is available on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. You can also check out the website at QLPOR.com.